I wasn't even planning to stop by the marina that morning. I only swung by to drop off a spare part for Seabreeze before heading to work, but the moment I turned the corner and saw a crowd gathered at the edge of the dock, phones out, pointing toward the water, I felt that familiar HOA-induced dread settle in my chest. People weren't just watching, they were laughing, and when I followed their gaze, my heart stopped. My boat, my Seabreeze, was cruising out of the marina, music blasting so loudly I could feel the bass from shore. A group of women danced on the deck, spilling drinks and taking selfies like they were filming a music video. And at the helm, there she was, HOA Karen, pink sunhut. Smug smile, shouting, "Girls' day out, baby," as if she owned the ocean. I didn't know whether to scream or faint, but one thing was certain. She had just stolen the wrong man's boat, because she had no idea I worked with the Coast Guard. Before we jump into this unbelievable ride, drop a comment with your location and local time, and don't forget to subscribe for more crazy HOA drama. I wish I could tell you that this was the first time Karen had crossed a line, or even the second, but if you've ever dealt with an HOA Karen, you already know they don't have lines. They have opinions, loud ones, entitled ones, and somehow those opinions always seem to rewrite reality inside their heads. The drama had actually started months earlier. Long before she ever set foot on my boat, Karen lived just a few houses down from me in our waterfront HOA community, an expensive, well-kept neighborhood that really should have been peaceful, the kind of place retirees imagined when they pictured quiet sunrise walks by the water. That was before Karen moved in and began enforcing her own personal version of maritime dictatorship. Her first complaint about my boat came the week she noticed me polishing the chrome rails on a Saturday morning. She strutted down the walkway in her bright pink blazer, the same one she wore to every HOA meeting, like it was a superhero cape, and said, "You know, it's really unfair that some people have boats and some people don't." I looked up, confused, because I honestly thought she was joking. She wasn't. "Boats," she continued, hands on her hips, "should be considered a shared amenity for our community. It's selfish to keep yours tied up all the time." Mind you, I paid full price for Seabreeze. I paid for the slip, I paid insurance, maintenance, upgrades, fuel, everything. Karen didn't contribute a penny, but in her world, fairness meant redistribution of other people's property. That was the beginning. Over the next few weeks, she escalated things like only an HOA Karen could. She left notes on my door saying I should schedule community boating days. She cornered me outside my garage and said her nephew really wanted to try a luxury boat ride at least once. She even complained to the HOA board that my refusal to lend her my boat created division within the neighborhood. To the board's credit, they told her, that's not how boats work, but Karen wasn't deterred. She had this uncanny ability to twist logic like a pretzel and still act offended when people didn't agree with her. Meanwhile, I did what any sane person would do. I ignored her, or tried to. Lucky for me, I had Jim, my next-door neighbor and best friend. Jim was the kind of guy who showed up whenever there was chaos because he somehow knew it would be entertaining. He always had two things on him, his iced coffee and his phone camera. If HOA drama was a sport, Jim would have been an Olympic documentarian. Every time Karen confronted me, Jim somehow wandered out from behind a hedge or appeared on his porch like a wildlife photographer waiting for a rare bird to misbehave. "She's going to explode one day," he'd whisper, sipping his coffee. I didn't know he meant it literally, but nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what she did that morning at the marina. Seabreeze wasn't just a boat, she was practically a member of my family. I'd spent years restoring her. New teak decking, custom upholstery, modern navigation, upgraded engine, the works. She was the kind of boat that turned heads, not because she was flashy, but because she was beautifully maintained. Karen knew this. She'd admired the boat often, but in that passive-aggressive way where she'd sigh dramatically and mutter things like, "Some people have all the toys," loud enough for me to hear. And yet, despite all that, despite every warning sign, I still somehow didn't imagine she'd be bold or stupid enough to actually steal it. But when I saw her earlier that morning, dancing on my deck with her gaggle of friends, everything suddenly made sense. This wasn't spontaneous. This wasn't impulse. This had been planned. Karen finally got what she wanted, a community boat day, except the community was just her and 3 HOA friends who enabled her every delusion. One of them was live streaming as Karen shouted, "Girls' day out on the HOA yacht." Another yelled, "Woo, Karen, you're the queen of the marina." My eye twitched. What really stunned me was how pleased Karen looked, like she had conquered a nation and was now parading through her new territory. She stood with one hand on the wheel, like some kind of discount cruise captain, and the other waving to strangers who looked more confused than impressed. For a moment, I just stood there, frozen. My brain couldn't wrap itself around the scene. It was too surreal. Jim, of course, appeared right beside me out of nowhere. He took one look at the boat, choked on his iced coffee, wiped his mouth, and said, "Bro, tell me this is a prank." I didn't even answer. I just kept staring at the floating circus act that used to be my peaceful weekend vessel. Jim lifted his phone. "Okay, but this is already going viral." The crowd at the dock grew as more people noticed the commotion. Karen's music echoed across the marina. And honestly, I think people stayed because it felt like watching a slow-motion train wreck. You didn't want to see it, but you couldn't look away. Then Karen spotted me. Her smile widened into something triumphant, and she shouted across the water, "Don't worry, I'm only taking her out for a quick spin." A quick spin? With 4 people? With drinks? With 0 boating experience? "With my boat?" Jim muttered. "Buddy, I think you're legally allowed to pass out right now." But I didn't pass out. My mind snapped into a very different kind of clarity. There was no reasoning with Karen, no polite conversation, no HOA complaint form. This was a stolen vessel, and I knew exactly who to call. I pulled out my phone, not hesitating for a second, not because I wanted revenge, but because I saw the way Karen was handling the wheel. She was jerking it too hard, overcorrecting her turns, drifting dangerously close to another boat's wake. She was going to hurt someone. Jim leaned in. "You're calling the HOA?" I shook my head. "No, I'm calling the Coast Guard." He blinked. Oh, this just got good." As I dialed, I kept watching Karen steer my boat like it was bumper cars. Her friends stumbled, grabbing the rails to avoid toppling over. Drinks spilled. Someone shrieked. Someone else laughed like they were immune to consequences. And that was Karen's whole problem. She always thought consequences were optional. But not today. Because today, she had stolen a boat belonging to someone she believed was just a regular homeowner. She didn't know my other uniform. She didn't know my badge. She didn't know who I worked alongside every week. She didn't know she had just messed with the Coast Guard. And as the call connected and I reported my stolen vessel, and the officer on the line immediately understood the seriousness of the situation, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Relief, because for the first time ever, someone besides me was finally going to put a stop to HOA Karen. The call connected with a sharp click, and I heard the calm, clipped voice of a Coast Guard dispatcher on the line. It was strange. My blood pressure was skyrocketing, adrenaline pumping through me like I'd run a marathon. Yet the voice on the other end sounded like someone reading a weather report, steady, neutral, completely unaware that my morning had just turned into a maritime soap opera. "United States Coast Guard, what's your emergency?" I swallowed hard and forced my voice to stay steady. "My vessel has been stolen." That got a reaction, I heard typing. Rapid and precise. "Stolen. Understood. Do you have a visual on the vessel?" "Oh, I have a visual," I said, staring out at the spectacle on the water. "It's a 24-foot cruiser named Seabreeze, white hull, teak deck, currently being operated by—" I paused, because how exactly do you describe what I was seeing? By a blonde woman in a pink sun hat who appears to believe she's the queen of spring break? Jim snorted so loudly beside me the dispatcher might have heard it. "I'm sorry, sir," the dispatcher said. "Could you repeat that?" I closed my eyes for a second, regaining my composure. "A woman has taken my boat without permission. She has 3 passengers. She is operating the vessel recklessly, and she does not have boating experience." A quiet beat, more typing. "Understood. Do you know the individual?" "Unfortunately, yes." I didn't say it out loud in those exact words. What I said was, "She's from my HOA." The dispatcher paused again, and I wondered if he was imagining the exact species of madness that comes out of a homeowners association. Whatever he pictured, the real version was worse. "We are dispatching a patrol boat to your location." He finally said, "ETA, 5 minutes. Please remain on shore and maintain visual contact. I'll be here." I hung up. Jim let out a long whistle. 5 minutes, bro. It's your lucky day." "It doesn't feel lucky," I muttered. Karen was now standing on the bow, one hand raised like she was Leonardo DiCaprio in Titanic, except, instead of grace and romance, she radiated the unfiltered chaos of a woman who had never in her life been told no, and clearly didn't intend to start today. Her friends cheered as she swayed dramatically, completely unaware she was seconds away from becoming a maritime cautionary tale. From shore, I could hear snippets of her shouting, "This is amazing, HOA, perks, ladies, we deserve this, deserve." That word coming from Karen always felt like nails on a chalkboard. Meanwhile, the scene around us looked like a tourist attraction. More boaters slowed, watching Karen zip around like a caffeinated pelican. Someone shouted, "Lady, learn to steer." Another yelled, "Wrong side, wrong side." A fisherman in a tiny skiff paddled frantically out of her path, barely avoiding her wake. Karen's response, "She blew him a kiss." Jim groaned. "She's gonna go viral for attempted manslaughter. She's going to get someone hurt. Yeah, probably herself." I rubbed my forehead. This wasn't just embarrassing, it was dangerous. Seabreeze wasn't built for this kind of rough handling, and Karen was jerking the wheel like she thought the boat functioned on vibes alone. I saw her swing too hard into a turn, and her entire passenger group lurched, grabbing the railings to keep from tumbling overboard. One of the women dropped her drink and shrieked, "Karen, watch it." Karen laughed. "Relax, I watched a YouTube tutorial," Jim choked. "Bro, she watched a tutorial. You are in danger. No kidding." Then, in the distance, I spotted the Coast Guard patrol boat approaching. Sleek, fast, controlled by people who knew what the hell they were doing. They cut through the water with purpose, and for the first time that morning, the knot in my stomach loosened. "They're here," I said quietly. The patrol boat slowed as it neared Seabreeze, and one of the officers lifted a bullhorn. "Vessel Seabreeze. Reduce speed and prepare to be boarded." Karen froze. Her friends froze. Even from shore, I could see the exact moment her confidence cracked. She grabbed the wheel and shouted back, "Excuse me, we're on a private cruise." The officer repeated the command, clearer this time. "Ma'am, reduce speed immediately." Jim started laughing like a lunatic. "Oh my God, she thinks she's above the Coast Guard." I watched as the patrol boat matched Karen's speed, pulling alongside her. Karen's arms flailed in dramatic disbelief. She shouted something, gesturing wildly toward shore, toward me, of all people, as if I could rescue her from the problem she created. Her friends finally started freaking out. "Karen, slow down. Karen, oh my God, they're serious. Karen, turn the boat." Karen did not turn the boat. In fact, she did the opposite. She panicked, yanked the wheel, and hit the throttle. Seabreeze lurched forward with a roar. The Coast Guard officer on the bullhorn shouted, "Mom, reduce speed immediately," Karen screamed back. "I'm in control." She was not in control. She drove straight through a no-wake zone, leaving a foamy explosion behind her. A pelican fled, a kayaker almost capsized. Jim nearly dropped his phone from laughing too hard. "Bro, she's gonna get a felony?" He wheezed. I didn't laugh. I couldn't. My boat was bouncing over waves. It was never supposed to hit at that speed. My heart climbed into my throat. Then it happened. Karen looked behind her for half a second, just long enough to lose track of where she was going. Seabreeze slammed into a buoy with a metallic crunch that echoed across the marina. Karen pitched forward, screaming. Her friends tumbled onto the deck. The boat rocked violently before settling into a painful tilt. I felt sick. The Coast Guard acted instantly. Within seconds, they boarded the boat, shut off the engine, and pulled Karen away from the controls. And she, lost, her mind. "Let go of me," she shrieked. "I am borrowing this boat. I have rights." One officer calmly handcuffed her. Jim whispered, "You know what? Maybe this is my lucky day." The officers helped Karen's friends up, making sure they were uninjured. Then one officer looked toward shore and called out, "Are you the owner?" I raised my hand. Karen whipped her head around, eyes full of betrayal, as if I had crashed my own boat into a buoy. "This is your fault?" she screamed. "Why would you call them?" I stared at her. "Because you stole my boat, Karen. I borrowed it. You took it without permission. Well, I knew you'd say no." Jim let out a choking laugh. "Legal mastermind right there?" Karen glared at him. "Shut up, Jim." The Coast Guard officer beside her sighed deeply, like a man who had seen one too many idiots in his career. "Ma'am, you are being detained for unauthorized vessel use, reckless endangerment, and failure to comply with maritime regulations." Karen gasped as if he'd accused her of treason. But even then, handcuffed, embarrassed, surrounded by witnesses, she somehow still believed she could talk her way out of this. She twisted toward me, eyes desperate. "You're not going to press charges, right?" I looked at Seabreeze, dented, scratched, humiliated. Then I looked at the woman who caused it all, and for the first time that morning, I actually smiled. Before I could answer Karen's frantic question, the Coast Guard officers guided her toward the patrol boat, her feet shuffling awkwardly on the deck as she fought against the handcuffs like they were an insult to her dignity. Her friends huddled on the opposite side of Seabreeze, whispering urgently to each other, their earlier excitement replaced by a fear that suggested they were suddenly realizing, "Oh, this isn't fun anymore." Jim zoomed in on her face with his phone. "This is golden. I'm framing this. Christmas cards." I elbowed him lightly. "Jim, for once in your life, maybe don't antagonize her." He shrugged. "She already hates me. I'm just adding spice." Meanwhile, Karen was mid-tantrum, yelling at the Coast Guard like they were customer service employees inconveniencing her shopping experience. "You can't arrest me. I'm on an HOA-approved outing." One of the officers raised an eyebrow. "Mom, HOAs don't govern maritime law." "One, Mom?" Karen scoffed, flipping her hair dramatically well. She tried to flip it, but with her hands cuffed behind her, it just made her wobble like a disgruntled flamingo. "They should. If they did, this wouldn't be happening." Jim laughed under his breath. "She's arguing jurisdiction with the Coast Guard. I think she's reached a new level." I watched, torn between fury and disbelief. I had seen Karen throw fits before at HOA meetings, at neighbors who parked half an inch over the property line, at dogs who dared to bark in her presence, but I had never witnessed a full meltdown on federal waters. Her friends, to their credit, gingerly approached me once the officers had secured her. We didn't know she wasn't allowed to use your boat," one said, avoiding eye contact. I blinked. "How would she have been allowed?" "Well," she said, "she had your permission." "Of course she did." The other friend piped in. "We thought this was like a neighborhood sharing program," Jim snorted. "It's not a library. You don't just check out a boat for Girls' Day." They instantly shrank, clearly wanting to vanish into the fibers of the dock. I almost felt bad for them. They were clueless, not malicious. But Karen? No. Karen knew exactly what she was doing. One of the officers approached me after escorting Karen onto their patrol vessel. "Sir, we need you to confirm. Did this woman have your permission to operate your vessel?" "Absolutely not," Karen shrieked from behind the officer. "Oh my God. Yes, he did. He said I could use it any time." I stared at her. "That never happened." She jerked her head in my direction, eyes wide with betrayal, like I had wronged her. "You said it with your eyes?" Jim wheezed beside me. "Bro." She just said, "You gave permission with your eyes. I can't breathe." The officer didn't even flinch. "Ma'am, that is not considered legal consent." "Yes, it is," she insisted. "In the HOA handbook it says, 'This isn't governed by your HOA,'" he repeated, far more patiently than she deserved. Karen gasped. "Well, it should be." At this rate, the man deserved a raise. 2 more officers boarded Seabreeze to assess the damage. One inspected the dented hull and shook his head sympathetically. "Looks like a hard impact. You'll need repair work. We'll document everything for your insurance claim." My stomach twisted. Every scratch felt like someone had keyed a car I'd spent years restoring, and I had restored Seabreeze with my own hands, sanding, polishing, installing upgrades, painting the trim. She was more than a boat. She was sweat, weekends, pride. Karen saw the look on my face and had the audacity to say, "Relax, it's just cosmetic." I snapped. "Cosmetic? You crashed my boat into a buoy because you can't tell the throttle from a toaster." Karen gasped like I'd slapped her. "You are being so dramatic," Jim whispered. "Dude, your patience lasted longer than I expected." The officer beside me cleared his throat. "Sir, would you like to accompany us as we process her detainment?" Before I answered, Karen seized her last lifeline. Her husband, Todd, red-faced and exhausted, arrived at the marina at a jog. He looked like a man whose soul had been slowly drained by years of HOA drama, especially the variety powered by his own wife. "Oh no," he muttered when he saw her handcuffed on the Coast Guard boat. "Karen, what did you do?" She immediately perked up as if he were her personal lawyer. "TOD, tell them I'm allowed to use the boat." His shoulders sagged. Karen, were you allowed to use the boat? Yes. With his eyes, Jim collapsed onto the dock, laughing. Todd closed his eyes. Karen, sweetheart, that is not a thing. Karen gasped again. Whose side are you on? Todd gestured helplessly at me. I'm on the side of the guy whose boat you stole. Borrowed. She screamed so loudly a flock of seagulls took flight. Even her friends backed away like they were afraid she might explode. Todd rubbed his temples. Karen, you can't borrow a boat without asking. Yes, I can. I knew he'd say no, so asking would have been pointless. The officer beside her said flatly, Ma'am, that is a confession. Karen's jaw dropped. No, it isn't, Jim whispered. Yes, it is. I finally stepped forward, tired beyond belief. Karen, I said, you didn't just steal my boat, you endangered people. You almost hit a fisherman. You broke maritime law. You damaged my property. You— Oh, please, she interrupted. Nobody died. It's fine. It's not fine, I said quietly. You crossed a line. She rolled her eyes so hard I worried she might strain something. Men and their toys. Todd buried his face in his hands. A different officer approached, holding a clipboard. Sir, we need your statement. Also, we require confirmation if you intend to press charges. Karen immediately twisted toward me, eyes pleading. No, 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 don't. I said I'd pay for the damages. Isn't that enough? Come on, be reasonable, Jim muttered. She's asking you to be reasonable. A strange calm washed over me. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was clarity. Maybe it was seeing my boat, a symbol of years of work, damaged because of someone who believed rules didn't apply to her. I looked at the officer. Yes. I want to press charges, Karen shrieked. What? Her voice cracked like a violin being stepped on. You can't do that. I'm the HOA president, Jim whispered. Not anymore after this video hits Facebook. Karen thrashed in her cuffs. This is harassment. I am being oppressed. The officer politely corrected her. No, ma'am. You are being arrested. Todd sighed so deeply, I felt it in my bones. The Coast Guard began escorting her fully onto their vessel for transport. Karen's screams echoed across the marina like a siren of entitlement. This is illegal. I'm calling my lawyer. I'm calling the HOA. I'm calling somebody, anybody. But nobody answered, because nobody could save her from the reality she created. As the patrol boat began to pull away, Karen continued shouting, her face flushed with fury, and then, because karma has a sense of humor, she slipped slightly on the wet deck and fell backward into a seated position with a thud. Jim whispered, That's going in the slow-mo section of the video. I looked at him. You're actually posting that. He turned his phone toward me. It's already posted. I froze. Already? Yep, he said proudly. We're at 20,000 views. Karen heard him, her head whipped toward us. What video? But the patrol boat was already pulling out of earshot. It was the first time I'd ever seen Karen look speechless. And honestly, it was beautiful. The Coast Guard patrol boat disappeared around the bend of the marina channel, taking with it the echo of Karen's indignant shrieking. As soon as her voice faded into the distance, the air seemed to relax, like the entire waterfront had been holding its breath and finally exhaled. But the chaos she left behind, oh, that stayed. People were still gathered along the dock, murmuring in disbelief. A few boaters who had nearly been hit were loudly recounting their side of the story to anyone who would listen. Karen's friends stood stiffly near a piling, avoiding eye contact with the crowd, clearly embarrassed to be associated with the aquatic crime spree of the century. Jim, on the other hand, was vibrating with more excitement than the boat engine Karen had abused. He replayed the video on his phone, chuckling between sips of his iced coffee. Look at this part, he said, zooming in. Right here, when she yells, borrowed. Tell me that's not peak comedy, I groaned. Please don't let this go viral. He raised an eyebrow as though I had said something profoundly stupid. Buddy, it's already viral. TikTok is eating this alive. How? You posted it 5 minutes ago, he shrugged. Internet moves faster than the Coast Guard. I rubbed my face. I really hoped he was exaggerating, though deep down I knew he absolutely wasn't. The internet loved chaos, and Karen was chaos personified. While Jim basked in the glow of online fame, I boarded Seabreeze with one of the Coast Guard officers who had stayed behind to document the damage. He stepped carefully across the deck, his boots echoing softly against the teak. Impact points along the bow, he said, crouching to inspect the dent. Looks like she hit the buoy at a pretty sharp angle. You're lucky she didn't rupture the hull. Lucky, I repeated, staring at the half-inch groove carved into the fiberglass. Right. I had poured months into restoring this boat. Every scratch felt like a personal attack. And Karen had treated it like a carnival ride she won on a radio contest. The officer snapped a few photos and scribbled notes on his clipboard. We'll include everything in our official report. It'll help with insurance. I nodded. Though my throat felt tight, Jim wandered over, leaning on the railing. At least she didn't blow up the engine, he offered. That was not helpful. Hey, look on the bright side, he said, smiling. She's finally going to face consequences. I glanced out toward the open water where the patrol boat had vanished. You think so? Dude, he said, gesturing with his phone. She's on federal waters. They don't play around. He had a point. HOA Karen may have bullied neighbors, threatened fines, and thrown tantrums at board meetings, but none of that prepared her for dealing with actual law enforcement, especially not the kind with badges, boats, and zero tolerance for maritime insanity. Still, guilt tugged at me, not because I regretted pressing charges, but because drama always had a way of continuing long after the main event ended. And with Karen, the main event was somehow never the end. As if on cue, her husband Todd approached us, hands in his pockets, looking like a man walking into a storm he knew he couldn't stop. He sighed heavily. I'm sorry, he said, voice low. I don't even know what to say anymore. I crossed my arms, unsure whether to comfort him or lecture him. Todd, she could have seriously hurt someone. I know. He ran a hand over his face. I tried to warn her. I told her not to go near your boat. She said she was taking initiative. Jim snorted. She took initiative right into a felony. Todd didn't even argue. He just stared at the ground. She's always been like this, her whole life. My therapist says she's addicted to confrontation. You have a therapist? Jim asked. I have to, Todd replied without missing a beat. I'm married to Karen. That was fair. Todd let out a weary breath. I'll pay for the damages, all of them. Whatever it costs. I shook my head. That's not up to me anymore. The Coast Guard is handling it. His shoulders tensed. Right, of course. Jim stepped between us, placing a hand on Todd's shoulder. Hey, man, this isn't on you, he said, surprisingly sincere. It's on Karen. Todd gave him a hollow smile. Tell that to my credit card. He shuffled away, leaving me feeling more conflicted than before. I didn't hate Todd. Honestly, I pitied him. Living with Karen had to be like living on a roller coaster, exhausting, disorienting, and entirely too loud. Before I could dwell on it further, my phone buzzed. At first, I thought it might be the Coast Guard following up. Nope, it was worse. Jim leaned over my shoulder as I opened the notification. Dude, he squeaked. Is that what I think it is? It was. The video of Karen screaming, borrowed, had hit 1 million views. How is that possible? I stammered. It's the internet, Jim said smugly. People love a good villain. She's not a villain, I muttered instinctively. Buddy, he said. She stole your boat, nearly killed a fisherman, ignored the Coast Guard, and screamed HOA laws at federal officers. She is the Thanos of our marina. I sighed, resisting the urge to bang my head against Seabreeze's railing. As the officer finished documenting the damage, he turned to me. We'll file the paperwork today. Expect follow-up calls regarding charges. He nodded toward the dent on the bow. We'll also need the repair estimate once you get it. Understood, I said. He extended a hand. Again, sir, we're sorry this happened, but we're glad we arrived before things escalated further. I shook his hand. Me too. After he disembarked, Jim and I stood silently for a moment on the deck, staring at the water. It was calm again, smooth, peaceful, nothing like the chaos Karen had stirred up just minutes earlier. I gotta ask, Jim said suddenly, breaking the quiet. When she was driving around like a drunk flamingo, were you scared she'd flip the boat? Yes, like, legitimately scared. Yes, Jim. He nodded. Good, because I was terrified. He pocketed his phone, then grinned, but also entertained. I rolled my eyes. Of course you were. We climbed off the boat and began walking back toward the parking lot. The crowd had dispersed. The gawkers had gotten their fill. Karen's friends had quietly slipped away like witnesses fleeing a crime scene. But as we approached the marina entrance, I saw someone leaning against a pole, arms folded, It was the fisherman Karen had almost run over. "You, the owner of that fancy boat?" he asked. "Yeah," I said cautiously. He nodded toward the open water. "Good. I hope they throw the book at her." I blinked. "You're not injured, are you?" "No," he said, "but I have a fear of being murdered," and she triggered it. Jim laughed so hard he doubled over. The fisherman shook his head. "I've seen idiots out here, but she's in a league of her own. She thinks she's above the rules," I admitted. He snorted. "Well, the rules got her today." He trudged off toward his skiff, muttering about crazy HOA people. Jim slapped my shoulder. "You hear that? Even strangers know she's the final boss of entitlement." I wanted to argue. I wanted to defend something. Todd, maybe. But honestly, he was right. Karen didn't just break rules. She believed she was the exception to them. And today, reality had finally caught up to her. But even with her being hauled off, the chaos wasn't over, because a person like Karen doesn't just disappear quietly into consequences. She comes back louder, stronger, more dramatic, and as we walked to the parking lot, my phone buzzed again, this time with a message from an unknown number. It was the Coast Guard. They wanted me to confirm something that made my stomach drop all over again. Karen wasn't done, not even close. The message from the Coast Guard wasn't long, just a simple request for me to come to their local station to clarify details regarding the suspect's statements. Suspect. That word still didn't feel real, even though Karen had been carted off in handcuffs like an entitled tornado that finally met a brick wall. Jim leaned over my shoulder, squinting at the text. "Clarify details, dude. She's blaming you for something, guaranteed." I rubbed my temples. Of course she is. She probably told them she was borrowing it for community service or some other nonsense. Jim took a long sip of his iced coffee. "Nonsense is your polite word. I'd call it Olympic-level delusion." We agreed to head over right away, not because I wanted to see Karen again, but because the Coast Guard sounded like they needed help deciphering whatever alternate reality she had spun for them. The station wasn't far, just a short drive up the waterfront road. Along the way, Jim kept refreshing the views on his now famous video. 2 million, he announced. I grit my teeth. "Jim, don't fight it. Embrace the fame, buddy. You're the guy whose HOA president stole his boat. You're practically an internet legend." I didn't feel like a legend. I felt tired and annoyed and vaguely horrified that Karen might try to sue me for emotional distress or something equally ridiculous. When we walked into the Coast Guard station, an officer at the front desk nodded in recognition. "You're the owner of Seabreeze." "Yes," I said. "I got a message. Right this way," he replied, and directed us to a small office down the hall. Inside sat Officer Riley, the same woman who had calmly handcuffed Karen while Karen accused her of violating HOA bylaws. Riley had a folder open in front of her and a look on her face that suggested she had already been through at least 3 Karen outbursts since we last saw her. She gestured for me to sit. "Thanks for coming so quickly." We needed to verify a few points. Jim sat as well, uninvited. But Riley didn't stop him. She probably sensed he was an important witness, or maybe she just didn't have the energy to deal with another entitled personality today. Riley folded her hands. "First, the suspect Karen claims she had prior permission to operate your vessel." I let out a humorless laugh. "Absolutely not. Not even remotely." Jim leaned in. "She said he gave permission with his eyes." Riley blinked. "With his eyes?" Direct quote, Jim said proudly. Riley sighed and jotted something down. "We suspected as much." Second, she stated that she was performing a sanctioned community event. "What community event?" I asked. Riley flipped a page. Something she called HOA Coastal Enrichment. Jim slapped a hand over his mouth, laughing silently. I stared at Riley, wondering if I had heard correctly. "HOA Coastal Enrichment, yes," she said, completely deadpan. She claimed she was leading a neighborhood outreach program. I groaned. "She kidnapped my boat for a fake community event. She insisted," Riley continued, "that as HOA president, she had authority to use neighborhood property as she saw fit. We informed her that your boat is not community property and that HOAs cannot override federal maritime regulations. And she didn't accept that. I guessed, no." Riley replied simply, "She did not." Jim leaned back smugly. "Called it," Riley continued, flipping another page. She also stated that she fled because she believed the patrol boat was, quote, attempting to ruin her outing. I pinched the bridge of my nose. "She thought you were ruining Girls' Day, Riley nodded. Correct. Jim slapped his knee. This is the best day of my life. Riley finally looked up from her notes and met my eyes. We needed your verbal confirmation to officially counter her claims on record. She's now facing up to 4 charges. Possibly more. I swallowed. More. She caused property damage to a federal navigation buoy, Riley explained. That may incur additional penalties depending on the repair assessment, Jim whispered. She's speedrunning federal crimes. I sighed. So, what happens now? Riley closed the folder. She'll be processed, cited, and released. You'll receive updates regarding court dates and repair estimates. Expect to file both an insurance claim and a restitution claim. Great. My weekend was about to be swallowed by paperwork, Riley added. There is one more thing. Something in her tone made my stomach tighten. She asked to speak with you. I froze. Why? She believes you can negotiate her release. Jim snorted so loudly, Riley cracked a tiny smile. She really doesn't understand how any of this works, does she? No, Riley said. She does not. I shook my head. I don't want to talk to her. Riley nodded. Understood. It's not required. We wrapped up the conversation and thanked her. But as we left the station, walking toward the parking lot, a familiar voice shrieked behind us. There he is, Jim groaned. Oh no, she escaped. But Karen hadn't escaped. She was being escorted by another officer, still fuming, still red-faced, still somehow convinced she had been wronged. Her cuffs were off, but her fury was not. She stormed toward us as much as someone being held by the elbow can storm. You, she snapped, pointing at me with all the force of a judge delivering a guilty verdict. You need to fix this, I blinked. Fix what? My arrest, my humiliation, my... She waved her hands wildly. My reputation, Jim whispered. Too late for that, Karen glared at him. Shut up, Jim. The officer escorting her cleared his throat. Ma'am, you are only permitted to speak briefly. Karen yanked her arm away and stepped closer to me. You don't understand what you've done. People are talking about me. They're laughing at me. I've gotten 20 texts already. Jim smiled proudly. 20? Try checking TikTok. She froze. Tick. What? He held up his phone. The thumbnail alone, Karen screaming with her sun hat sideways, was enough to make her blanch. What is that? Your close-up? Jim said. The internet loves your catchphrase. My what? He tapped the play button. Karen's own voice blasted from the speakers. It's a borrow, followed by her screeching I have rights, followed by a thud as she fell backward during her arrest. Her face turned the shade of overripe tomatoes. Turn that off, she shrieked. Lunging for the phone, the officer grabbed her arm before she could reach Jim. Mom, do not attempt to grab his property. Karen's voice cracked. Take it down. Delete it. I'll sue. Jim sipped his coffee. You were in a public marina committing a crime? This is all legal, Karen sputtered. But my image, my HOA status, my dignity. I couldn't help myself. Karen, that ship sailed the moment you stole mine. Her jaw dropped. I continued. You didn't borrow my boat. You stole it. You risked people's lives, and you damaged federal property. Karen shook her head violently. No, this is a misunderstanding. A big, stupid misunderstanding. The escorting officer spoke up. Ma'am, it's time to go. Karen pointed at me one last time, trembling with rage. This isn't over. You'll regret this. I'm still president of the HOA, but even she didn't sound convinced. The officer led her away, her complaints echoing down the hallway like a tantrum drifting off into the distance. Jim watched her go, then elbowed me lightly. You realize she's never going to let this go, right? I exhaled. I know. And that the internet is now obsessed with her, I know that too. He grinned. So, lunch. I shook my head, laughing for the first time that day. Yeah, lunch. But even as we walked out into the sunlight, I knew this wasn't the end. Karen wasn't defeated. She was wounded, and a wounded Karen is 10 times more dangerous. For the next few days, the marina felt strangely calm, almost suspiciously calm, like the quiet after a hurricane. But with Karen, silence was never a sign of peace. It was a warning, a countdown, a fuse burning somewhere unseen. Jim noticed it too. 3 days after the incident, he peeked over the fence dividing our backyards and said, I haven't heard a single Karen scream all morning. That's not normal. Should we call animal control? Maybe she crawled into a possum trap. I appreciate the optimism, I said, but she's plotting something. I can feel it. Jim nodded gravely. Yeah, I sense disturbance in the HOA force. But Karen didn't show up, not at my house, not storming through the neighborhood, not even at the HOA clubhouse where she usually held meetings to lecture people about their lawn heights or garbage bin alignment. It was almost eerie. Meanwhile, my days were consumed with insurance calls, repair estimates, and paperwork the Coast Guard sent me. The damage to Seabreeze wasn't catastrophic, but it wasn't cheap either. The bow repair alone was going to run several $1,000s. Then there were internal checks, structural assessments, and temporary storage fees, all because Karen couldn't resist the urge to turn my boat into her own private reality TV show. And while I dealt with repairs, the internet was having the time of its life. Jim sent me updates daily. 4 million views, 7 million, oh my God. Someone made a remix of her yelling, "Borrowed." Listen, I didn't listen, but I couldn't avoid it forever. On the 5th day, I overheard 2 teenagers at the marina singing, "It's a Boru, baby," to the tune of a pop song while laughing hysterically. Jim was right, Karen had become a meme, but I didn't see the full scope until one night when I finally caved and checked my own notifications. People from all over the world had tagged me in posts. News outlets reached out. A boating podcast wanted to interview me. Someone had printed Karen's face onto a t-shirt that read, HOA. Doesn't stand for Have Others Amenities. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Jim, on the other hand, was thriving. I found him lounging on his porch with sunglasses on, replying to comments like a celebrity. When he saw me, he grinned. "Welcome to fame, buddy." "I don't want fame." "Too bad. Fame wants you." I sighed. "What about Karen? Has she reacted?" Jim's grin softened. "Oh, you haven't heard?" He stood up dramatically and cleared his throat like he was about to narrate a nature documentary. Behold, the rare and volatile species known as the HOA Karen, now in her natural habitat of community service. I blinked. Community service? Jim nodded. Mandatory, per her charges. She's been assigned to the marina cleanup crew twice a week, and rumor has it she's not taking it well. I closed my eyes. Please don't tell me people are filming her. Jim hesitated, which meant they definitely were. So the next morning, I drove to the marina not to see her, I told myself, but to check on Seabreeze, which had been hauled up for repairs. But the moment I walked onto the dock, I saw her. She wore oversized sunglasses, a floppy hat, and a reflective vest, like she was in witness protection. In her hand was a trash picker. She was wielding like it personally offended her. Each time she stabbed a piece of litter, she muttered curses under her breath. "Are you kidding me? Trash? They have me picking up trash? Me?" Her voice carried across the dock, and a few boaters glanced her way, whispering. Karen noticed them and snapped, "What? Never seen community service before." I tried to slip past quietly, but of course, Karen spotted me. She froze, her jaw clenched. Then, dragging her bucket behind her like a child dragging a backpack on the first day of school, she stomped toward me. "This is your fault." I braced myself. "Good morning, Karen." "No, it is not a good morning," she hissed. "Do you know how humiliating this is? People are pointing at me. They're whispering." "Karen," I said calmly, "you stole my boat." "I borrowed it. You crashed it into a buoy. A small buoy. You ignored the Coast Guard. They were interrupting my event." "There was no event." "Yes, there was," she insisted. "It was an HOA coastal enrichment excursion. You made that up?" Karen jabbed her trash picker in my direction like a medieval spear. "You have ruined my reputation." Jim appeared behind me at that exact moment, sipping his iced coffee. "Actually," he corrected cheerfully, "you ruined your reputation. The internet just reported it." Karen's face twisted. You and that stupid phone. You turned me into a meme." Jim gave a polite bow. "My art has never been so appreciated." "I hate you," she spat. "Get in line." Jim replied. Karen turned back to me, eyes wild. "You have to fix this. Tell them to take the video down." I couldn't help but laugh. "Karen, you can't just take down the internet." "Yes, I can." "No, you can't. Watch me." She marched across the dock to where a group of teenage both hands were laughing at their phones. She pointed at them. "You, all of you, stop watching that." One boy raised his phone and said, "Is this you?" Karen shrieked. slapped the phone out of his hand, and immediately got scolded by a marina supervisor. I sighed. She's getting worse. Jim nodded. Oh yeah. Entitlement spirals before it dies. But the real surprise came later that afternoon. I was sitting on a bench near the repair shop, waiting for the latest estimate, when I saw Todd walking toward me. He looked more drained than before, like each day married to Karen, shaved off a year of his life expectancy. "Can I sit?" he asked quietly. Of course. He sat heavily, elbows on his knees. "I wanted to talk to you, apologize again, and explain something." I frowned. "Explain what?" He took a shaky breath. "Karen doesn't handle consequences well. She never has. She grew up getting everything she wanted. Her parents never said no. And when we married, I didn't realize she couldn't accept denial from anyone." I nodded slowly. "She thinks rules are obstacles, suggestions, not laws, and she truly believes she deserves special treatment." His voice cracked. "She thinks asking for permission makes her less than." I exhaled, finally, something that made sense, not justification, but insight. Todd continued. "She's terrified right now. Not of the Coast Guard, not even the charges. She's scared because she can't control the narrative, people laughing at her. It's her worst nightmare," Jim muttered. "Maybe she should have thought about that before becoming a nautical menace." Todd didn't argue. He looked at me again, eyes heavy. "I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope, maybe one day, you won't hate her." I shook my head. "Todd, I don't hate her. I just want her to stop hurting people." He nodded weakly. "Me too." We sat in silence for a moment, the waves gently lapping the dock. Then my phone buzzed. Another message from the Coast Guard. Jim leaned in. "What now?" I opened it. My stomach sank. "Oh no," I whispered. Jim's face lit up. "Ooh, I love when you say that." I handed him the phone. He read the message aloud. "In reviewing the suspect's statements and video evidence, additional liabilities have been identified regarding the damaged buoy. Please be advised that charges may escalate, and you may be required to give further testimony." Jim gasped dramatically. "She's leveling up. Karen has unlocked federal consequences." Todd groaned and buried his face in his hands, and I knew in my bones. We still weren't anywhere close to the end of this story. Karen's meltdown at the marina had been dramatic enough, but the aftermath, that's where the real chaos began. And not the loud, explosive chaos she was known for. No, this was quieter, more desperate, the kind of chaos that brews when someone realizes the world is no longer bending to their will. The Coast Guard's message had shaken me more than I expected. Additional liabilities, testimony required, escalating charges. Jim, of course, was thrilled. "This is amazing," he whispered. "She's speedrunning federal offenses like she's trying to unlock a STEAM achievement." "It's not amazing," I muttered. "It's exhausting." Todd sank deeper into the bench, as if hoping it would swallow him. "She's not going to handle this well," he said. "She's already furious about the community service. If she finds out, she might have to go to federal court." He didn't finish the sentence, but we all knew where it was going. Jim nodded gravely. "We might need to reinforce the HOA clubhouse windows." I ignored him and headed back to my truck. My brain needed silence, clarity, distance. But fate and Karen never allow such luxuries. That evening, as I prepped dinner, I heard the unmistakable sound of someone stomping up my driveway. Not walking, stomping, like a toddler mid-tantrum. Then my doorbell rang, 5 times. Rapid fire, Jim texted immediately. "Jim, bro, did Karen just run to your door?" "Jim, I am watching from my window." "Jim, she looks like a flamingo that stepped on a rake." I sighed, squared my shoulders, and opened the door. Karen stood there, still in her community service vest, mascara smudged from sweat and humiliation. Her sunglasses were pushed up crookedly on her head, and she clutched her phone like a weapon. Her voice trembled not with fear, but with rage barely contained. "You ruined my life." I didn't even get a greeting. I crossed my arms. "Karen, I didn't ruin anything. You stole, borrowed," she snapped. "You stole my boat," I continued calmly. "You ignored the Coast Guard. You put people in danger, and you damaged federal equipment. That's all on you." "No," she shouted, stepping closer. This, she waved her phone in my face. "This is on you." I glanced at the screen. It was the viral video of her screaming about borrowing my boat. I want it taken down, she demanded. All of it, every copy. That's not possible, I said. Once it's online, I don't care. She cut me off. Fix it. I stared at her. How would you like me to fix the entire internet, Karen? Her face contorted. You started this, you called the Coast Guard instead of just talking to me. You took my boat without permission because you would have said no. That's the point of asking. She stomped her foot, and for a moment, I wondered if she genuinely believed stomping could rewrite reality. You don't understand what you've done, she cried. People are avoiding me, they whisper when I walk by. They filmed me picking up trash at the marina. Trash. Jim appeared in my driveway with a bowl of popcorn. I glared at him. Really? He shrugged. You didn't tell me to leave. Karen spun toward him, jabbing a finger in the air. This is your fault too. Jim held up his bowl. Not my problem. Sunshine. She growled. Then she turned back to me, fists clenched. You're going to tell the Coast Guard to drop the charges. No, I said. You're going to file a statement saying, you forgive me. No, you're going to tell people the video is fake. No, she gaped at me like no one had ever told her that word before. And maybe they hadn't. Her entire life, people probably bent over backward to avoid her tantrums. They probably enabled her entitlement. They probably let her get away with everything because dealing with her was simply too exhausting. But I was done enabling her. I'm not lying to protect you from consequences, I said quietly. You did this. You need to deal with it. Her breath hitched. For a moment, just a split second, I saw actual vulnerability in her eyes, fear, confusion, desperation. But then she blinked, and it was gone. You're going to regret this, she hissed. I doubt it, I replied. She spun around, practically vibrating with indignation, and stormed off my porch. Jim popped another kernel into his mouth. That went better than expected. Better, I said. He nodded. She didn't throw anything. Fair enough. But Karen wasn't done, not even close. 2 days later, I got a call from the Coast Guard. Sir, this is regarding your vessel Seabreeze. My stomach tightened. What's going on? We've completed our damage assessment. The buoy repair is substantial. Additionally, the suspect attempted to dispute our findings. Of course she did. She claimed you sabotaged your own boat to frame her. I pinched the bridge of my nose. Why would I do that? She suggested you were jealous of her leadership role in the HOA. I stared at the wall. Are you serious? She insisted she was innocent because, quote, I am the HOA president, and HOA presidents do not commit crimes. Jim, listening from the couch, burst out laughing so hard he nearly fell off. The officer continued, We've declined her claim. However, due to her behavior, additional hearings may be necessary. We will need your presence. Great. Another round with Karen and her fantasy world. But the real climax came a week later. I returned to the marina to check on Seabreeze, now halfway through repairs, and found Karen again, this time sweeping the dock under supervision. When she saw me, she froze. But she didn't yell, she didn't stomp, she didn't even glare. Instead, she looked down, shoulders slumped, jaw tight, movements slow. She looked defeated. I approached cautiously. She didn't run, didn't complain, didn't threaten. She just kept sweeping. Finally, she whispered, People keep recognizing me. I nodded. That happens when you go viral. I hate it. I figured. She swallowed hard. I didn't think it would get this bad. I studied her. For once, she wasn't loud or self-righteous. She wasn't lecturing me about HOA laws or screaming about borrowed boats. She was just a human, flawed, embarrassed, afraid. I sighed. Karen, you can come back from this, but you have to own what you did. Stop blaming everyone else. She didn't respond. After a moment, she said quietly, Do you think they'll forgive me? The HOA, the marina, everyone. I thought about it. I think people forgive faster than you think, I said, but only if you change. Her hands tightened on the broom handle. And if I don't? She asked. I shrugged. Then this won't be the last time something like this happens, and the consequences will get worse. She nodded slowly, eyes glistening but refusing to cry. I don't want to be a meme anymore, she whispered. Then don't behave like one. Jim called from behind a piling, holding yet another iced coffee. Karen shot him a glare, but it lacked its usual venom. She turned back to her sweeping, and I let her be. As I walked away, the marina felt a little less tense, a little less hostile, a little more hopeful. Maybe Karen really would learn. Maybe this was the beginning of a quieter version of her. Or maybe, just maybe, she'd explode again next month. But that, thankfully, would be a future problem. For now, Seabreeze would be repaired, justice was served, and Karen had finally met something stronger than her entitlement, consequences. At the end of it all, standing on the dock, watching the sun set over the marina, I realized something important. Entitlement isn't just annoying, it's dangerous. People like Karen don't start out wrecking boats or clashing with the Coast Guard. It begins smaller, cutting corners, ignoring rules, assuming they're the exception, and when no one pushes back, that entitlement grows until it eventually causes real harm. But consequences, when they finally arrive, can do what logic and arguments never could they teach. If there's a lesson in all this, it's that accountability matters, not just for the person who messed up, but for everyone around them. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is stop enabling bad behavior and let reality speak for itself. What would you have done in my situation? Comment below.